Can you summarize David Hume's thoughts about the nature of miracles?
Okay, David Hume's essay on miracles. Let me put it in a historical context. The essay is pre-Revolutionary War. Now, strangely enough, different books give different dates for this thing. It's actually a section in a very well-known book. It's section 10 of his inquiry. And it's called Of Miracles. This famous little essay, Of Miracles, is the most influential thing ever written against miracles. It has two parts, section 1, section 2, part 1, part 2. And Hume argues that a miracle, by definition, is a violation of a law of nature brought about by God or an invisible agent. And I say, well, that sounds like a Christian objection, a Christian definition. Well, first of all, it's Hume's. It's the arch skeptic. And Hume says, a miracle is a violation of nature brought about by God or some invisible agent. Now, somebody like a Richard Swinburne, a contemporary major world philosopher, Swinburne doesn't seem to mind the word violation, but most Christian philosophers protest that violation is just like too strong. You can say an alteration of the laws of nature or a temporary transcending of the laws of nature. But anyway, that's Hume's definition. And Hume says it's an act of God or an invisible agent. In other words, an angel, a demon. And somebody might say, oh, what a dummy. He believes all that stuff. No, he doesn't. He's simply defining what it would be if there were any. And then he goes on and makes the critics happy by telling you there aren't any. And he says, we don't have any empirical evidence for miracles, and therefore the proof, he uses that word, therefore the proof against miracles from the beginning is as entire as anything could be. Now he uses the word proof, but when you read the rest of Hume's writings, by proof he means probability. We have probable arguments against miracles. And at first he develops that definition, and he says it would be a miracle that Queen Elizabeth, for example, would rise from the dead. He actually says it would be a miracle if anybody were to rise from the dead. That would fit the definition of miracle. But then he says he doesn't give it a shot. He says it would be a miracle, but it's never been observed anywhere at any time. And I'm thinking, whoa, what about the resurrection? And Hume has just already passed it. Yeah, that would be a miracle, but they don't happen, so whatever. So he gets blamed a lot with an a priori rejection of miracles. He gets blamed with either rejecting them without considering an argument, or at least rejecting them with not much. And then in part 2, he makes 4 subsidiary arguments. And he says, for example, that miracles happen among ignorant and backward nations. He says that we don't have any miracles for which the evidence is super strong. He says, now he ends by saying miracles and world religions cancel each other out. That's the most debated one, because if a Buddhist miracle cancels a Christian miracle and the Christian miracle cancels the Buddhist miracle, what if the Christian miracle is well attested, the Buddhist miracle is not? Now, we've been taking great pains in some of these little interviews to talk about early responses to resurrection going back to the same year or shortly afterwards. And that's according to atheist New Testament scholars, going back to the same year or afterwards. That's early evidence. We can trace some of it to eyewitnesses, not just Paul, but we said Paul went to Jerusalem and interviewed Peter and James and then later John on the topic of the resurrection. You've got to talk about the appearances. So he interviews people. Bart Ehrman even says, by the way, that that's one of the two strongest evidences of the historicity of Jesus, is who Paul knew and who he interviewed. A brother of Jesus, the chief apostle, and the second most best-known apostle, John. Okay, so there is good evidence. So how could you say Buddha's miracles rule out Jesus' miracles? Now, I have Buddhist sources that say the miracles of Buddha aren't recorded for hundreds of years later. Ed Yamauchi, the retired professor of ancient history, University of Miami of Ohio, says Jesus is the only founder of a major world religion who has miracles reported within a generation. And the critical community, critics as a whole, accept that healing events like in the Gospels really occurred. So how could you rule out those for which critics think there's good enough evidence you can say he was a healer? How can you rule that out when Buddha's miracles are 500 years later? That's Hume's most debated point. And he says they happen among ignorant, barbarous nations. Well, what if I talk about some today? What if we talk about double-blind prayer experiments or healing miracles? These have been published. Cases that have been published immediately afterwards. So a lot of attacks go on Hume. Another kind of attack on Hume is that philosophers have gone after his view of induction. You cannot do induction, which is the scientific method. You can't do induction the way he's doing it. And I can explain that later if you want. So that's Hume's essay, written approximately 25 years before the Revolutionary War, and today it's still famous.